Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, October 15th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. Brian Smith producing on the ones and twos in the background. Almost was on the show. Forgot to put him in the background before hitting the record button. We'll get Brian on camera one of these days. We appreciate all the hard work he's doing for us behind the scenes. On this episode, we discuss the Mets drawing level in the NLCS with some success against the Dodgers bullpen. We're going to look at a bigger picture question around teams that hit bullpens effectively. Yes, there was a Robert Orr story in there that got us thinking about this a little bit as well. So we'll connect a few dots there. Had a few follow-ups to our Tigers eulogy that I thought were pretty interesting. So we'll get to those. And of course, we'll talk about the ALCS, which has Game 2 getting underway on Tuesday night. We're not going to preview Game 2 because it's going to be happening by the time many people hear this podcast. But we've got some interesting observations about Carlos Rodón, who pitched effectively in Game 1 as the Yankees took the opener of that series. How's it going for you on this Tuesday?
Going good. We all the family's out of the house now, so we're back to just the regular zoo that we've got going here. So,
yeah, like the movie, we built the zoo.
You just 2 kitties, 2 dogs, 6 fish, 2 sons.
Everybody's happy. That's the key. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description, by the way. Get some more lively chatter going as these playoffs continue. But let's start today with the Mets. The bullpen game backfired on the Dodgers. The Mets slugged their way to even the series. A Mark Vientos grand slam really punctuated a 5-run second inning for the Mets. That's all they ended up needing in that game. And a lot of ways to pick this one apart. But the thing that surprised me was that the Dodgers went to Landon Knack so early in this game compared to the usage in the bullpen game of, I think it was Game 4 of the NLDS against the Padres. We thought we'd see Knack this early then. Instead, we saw him in the final inning of a game that was out of hand. So I wonder what it was matchup-wise that the Dodgers preferred here, because with the off day on Tuesday and with very few high-leverage relievers needed behind Jack Flaherty in Game 1, the card was wide open, and the Dodgers chose to go this route. Now, I realize because it didn't work, it's going to get the extra criticism, but the order matters a lot. I thought they'd follow a very similar script to what worked in San Diego.
I think Knack has one of these fastballs that has surprising movement given his slot. And I wonder if, the Dodgers say, hey, Knack faced the Padres like a week ago, when they last had this decision. And, maybe we think that this is the kind of fastball that has faster decay, as in batters see it, and can do more with it once they've seen it rather than batters who've never seen it. And what you saw with the way that Landon Knack pitched too was that he came in as a 2-pitch guy. It was fastball slider. He was not, throwing the curve and the change that he threw 15, 16% of the time during the regular season. He was a 2-pitch guy. And I think that the game plan was thought that they're going to actually have a hard time hitting this fastball. And it's a good slider. So that's what he's going to be. He's going to be a 2-pitch, reliever type for us. And he's going to go one time through the order. And instead, I think you saw that they saw his fastball pretty well. And in particular, in this Mark Vientos at bat, what I think you see is, there's one fastball, the 4th pitch of it. So he's got, with just sliders, he's got him to a 1-2 count with 2 fouls on sliders. Then he throws a 4-seam fastball that's like 4 inches above the zone, and Vientos fouls that off too. And the next slider is a ball in the dirt, thinking, okay, well, maybe he'll just swing over the top of something. But by the time he throws the 6th slider and the 7th pitch overall, he does something that puts him in trouble. That 7th slider is a ball. And at that point, it's a 3-2 count, and he hasn't gotten a single swing and miss from Mark Vientos. So Landon Knack has tried everything. He's tried, the high fastballs, high sliders, low sliders. And now with the 3-ball count and the bases loaded, he has to throw a fastball that's not 4 inches above the zone, like his last fastball. That must have been the thinking. And so he throws a fastball that's in the zone, and it just happens to be middle. And I think this is like when you are a 2-pitch pitcher and one of your pitches is a fastball, and we know that pitchers miss 10 to 13 inches on average is what the research suggests. That means that every time you're throwing a fastball in this situation, it's like you're in the 80s ripping packs. And one of those, you're going to rip the pack open. It's going to be the manager card. And nobody wants the manager card. And that's the middle fastball. That's the Tom Kelly on your piece of cardboard, sitting in the dugout is his action picture. That's the home run. That's the grand slam he gives up, and I think, it's about count leverage there, but it's also just not about not sneaking in any of his other pitches when he's starting to see, oh man, he's fouling everything off. There's got to be some idea, a right-on-right change you brought up. Maybe that's not the best idea across, everything, but it's probably something Vientos hasn't seen that much,
Yeah.
Or just a big old lollipop curveball that Vientos takes for strike 3. Probably would have been a better idea than middle fastball. When you're seeing him, he's geared up to hit everything.
Right. Middle fastball wasn't the plan. It was
that wasn't the plan.
But I think that's the part that's tricky to me is like you do have a third and fourth pitch, even if you don't like them. In that situation where you're not getting any sort of swing and miss and you didn't have the command of the fastball dusting something else off. I think if you said, it's your call, DVR, what would you have thrown? I think I would have gone with the curve because I think you want to change speeds again. If he's fouling everything off and the change is about the same speed as the slider.
He's on that like 87 to 94. Like he's right. He's hot. He's up there. Throw something that's 79.
That's what I would have tried. And maybe he would have just hit the crap out of that or fouled it off or something too. And this would have happened eventually anyway. The other part of this though is, Mark Vientos has been phenomenal in the playoffs and he's been very good all year, right? That's one of the stories of how'd the Mets get here and why is this working? He's added some depth and quality to this lineup. I mean, this is a guy that had major questions about his defense. That's the main reason I think people like me were on Brett Baty instead. Brett Baty's not a smooth defender at third base, but I thought he was less of a liability than Vientos. I thought we saw some signs that Baty was going to take a step forward this year, and instead Mark Vientos was that guy. He had the breakout that I thought Brett Baty was going to have, and the way he does it, tons of hard contact, right? We've seen that from day one from Mark Vientos in the big leagues. He's keeping the K rate around 30%. He's patient enough to draw walks. He can do the damage. Where do we go in 2025? Like, there's still a few chapters of his season to be written in this series, possibly in the World Series. But for a guy that popped 27 homers and 454 plate appearances and did it in an environment that is pitcher friendly for half of his games, I think people are going to be looking at Vientos as a legitimate top 100 target in some instances because power comes at a premium in those middle rounds. And I think he's done more than enough this year to establish himself as a core piece for the Mets going into next season.
Yeah, well, the Mets are also losing a core piece that I'm also going to put onto every team in baseball by the end of the offseason, which is Pete Alonso. And I do think the flaws are still there. The defensive numbers line up with the eye test for me with Mark Vientos. I don't think he's a good third baseman. We've already had plays in the playoffs that could have led to, bad situations and just happened not to. But we've seen him bobble, 3 balls at third. We've seen some poor throws. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like good hands to me. And so if I were the Mets, I would love to already, I'd love to already move Vientos to first if I'm not going to wrap up Pete Alonso. And that does paper over one problem for the team, but it doesn't necessarily solve everything because then you need a third baseman. And you could give Brett Baty another try. You're also, as the Mets, going to clean up a fair amount of the books this year with Quintana, Severino, Harrison Bader, JD Martinez, Brooks Raley, Adam Ottavino, Ryan Stanek, Jesse Winker coming off the books along with Alonso. Right now, they have, even with the arbitration set up, they have $172 million under contract next year. they and the luxury tax, they were at 358 last year. So obviously that means they could just sign Alonso back, and maybe that's what's most likely. But it does open the door for them to do something different and sign like an Alex Bregman or something, to play third, move Vientos to first. And obviously from the names that I mentioned, they have to spend on starting pitching.
Right. That'll be, regardless of how things go, something the Mets are trying to address this winter. I think the Bregman possibility makes a lot of sense. I think not putting JD Martinez on the roster again next year also leaves the door open for Vientos to coexist with a re-signed Pete Alonso. They could share first base and DH. So, they basically platoon the DH with Winker and JD right now. There's no compelling reason to bring both of those guys back.
People keep putting Juan Soto on the Mets too.
Sure.
So that's going to be a big outlay of cash. But I think that with going from 358 to 172, I think that there is enough room for them to do. I think it's probably Soto or Alonso, because I think they do have to spend a fair amount on starting pitching. Do you think they could do Soto and Alonso and like 3 starting pitchers? Maybe.
I think the limit does not exist. I think it is a situation.
They were comfortable with 358 last year. So.
Look at what the Dodgers just did this winter. Like there's actually no reason that we know of that the Mets can't do stuff like what the Dodgers just did spending wise with Ohtani and Yamamoto and extending Glasnow. I mean, everything's on the table for the Mets
with their defensive shortcomings of Mark Vientos, though. Maybe some of their, one of their signings should be a little bit more tilted towards defense. If you think about it, like either a Bregman or signing Willy Adames to play third or something.
Oh, come on, man! No, we're just gonna do that.
We're just gonna give him everything. You just wanted to give him everything. I'm giving him everything.
No, it's true, and I think with Bregman. How do you think Alex Bregman's defense is going to age? I think his bat is aging pretty well. We've seen a few lulls, even in these years. These last 3 seasons have looked pretty much the same by the end. This year being the outlier from an OBP perspective. He dropped all the way down to a 315. So maybe we're starting to see a little bit of decay with the eye in particular. But if defensively, Bregman is going to be good or solid for most of a long-term deal, and we think he's the type of hitter that won't age poorly, then that ends up being a pretty nice long-term deal for any team that signs him, I guess. Do you agree, though, that the defense holds up fine over time for him at third base?
I mean, if you ignore UZR, and I think in this case it might be a good idea because the Astros at some point were on the forefront of shifting, and UZR doesn't use starting position. And you focus more on DRS and outs above average. So DRS has a negative for Alex Bregman in 2022 and a negative in 2017, but it also has seasons where he was worth 8 defensive run saves, and outs above average has never had him negative. So, I just voted on the Fielding Bible awards, and one of the things I did was when I'm looking across the different stats, if I gave people credit if they had like a 15 outs above average or like a 15 DRS, even if outs above average or DRS didn't agree with it, I was just like, hey, one of these systems thinks this guy's out of sight. And the other thing I did was if one of the systems had a negative on there, I would kind of push them down a little bit because one of these systems thinks he's not good at all. When you look at Alex Bregman's page, what I see is the systems both agree he's excellent.
Yeah. So if you're excellent today, we're going to probably slowly regress you down to average over like a 6-year deal, if that's what he ends up getting.
And all of his plate skills are so excellent in terms of making contact and walking. I know he's not our type in terms of barreling and max EV and hard hit, but I just feel like the average and the OPP are always going to be pretty good. And if he only hits you 15 to 20 homers by near to the end of that contract, everything else is going to be all right. It depends on the number. It really depends on the number. If he wants, hundreds of millions of dollars, like, I don't know.
Well, I think you have to look at him compared to what else is out there. And if you're considering something like Willy Adames, as an option to play off of shortstop, where Adames is still a good enough defender to play for just about any team that would be looking for help there, right? Like, how do they compare apples to apples? Like, if you had to go to the same number of years and the same dollar amount, and I've been, for the entire time, I've been thinking about what it would take long term for any team to have Willy Adames. I've said, well, the Dansby Swanson contract with the Cubs, 7 for $177, is probably attainable for him. I mean, Bregman turns 31 around opening day next year, end of March next year. Adames will turn 30 next September. So they're close in age, but Adames is a year younger and he plays the more valuable position. So it matters.
Better athlete than Bregman.
So let's assume Bregman's going to get maybe one less year, but the AAVs are comparable. Is that a reasonable place to put the conversation? If that's the situation, which one would you sign if you could only add one because some other team's going to swoop in and get the other one?
I think I lean towards Adames because I would be nervous, especially if I was the Mets in particular. I'd be a little bit nervous to see how Bregman's power ported over to my stadium.
Yeah. Okay.
And Adames has like kind of that no doubt power.
Yeah. He fits into the hits the ball very hard bucket, which I think is a big part of why he popped up in Discord. Logan I-54, listening to our eulogy for the 2024 Tigers in the Monday episode, suggested Willy Adames is a fit for the Tigers, which would mean they'd push Trey Sweeney off of short. I don't think is impossible. I think you can basically look at this offseason for the Tigers and say, we've got some defensive flexibility at a couple spots. As a result, we're going to get the best possible hitter and we'll make the pieces fit, right? With our mixing and matching. I could see that as one of the options. I think the thing that Adames satisfies is hitting the ball hard enough to still have power at Comerica, right? Yeah. We got 4 consecutive seasons with a double-digit barrel rate, still right close to his power peak age-wise, a couple of 30 home run seasons, showed more speed this year. Mentioned the defense before, still being generally good at shortstop, occasionally makes the mistake on like a routine play, but generally a very good defender. So what do you think about the Tigers as a fit for Willy Adames?
Yeah, and I was thinking about, my sort of offhand comment of, going cheap with right-handed veterans like Justin Turner or JD Martinez. And I think if I'm the Tigers, I kind of feel like, no, even if it's just a mini resurgence from Torkelson or somebody, stepping up from what we have, we can kind of do that level. What we need is either youth where there's like Torkelson, where there's a chance that he's even better, like he finally breaks out, right? So that the error bar is in the right direction, or we need someone who can hit the snot out of the ball. And one of my reasons for this is I was looking at the StatCast venue park factors, and what they have are speed and angle park factors, and including this one line called environmental park factors. And they say extra feet of distance versus average given the same exit velocities. And I think this is kind of a really important spot here. It was minus 4.5 feet last year in Comerica. So basically, to achieve the same results that you would want in a neutral park, you'd have to hit the ball 4.5 feet farther. So I do think that for them, if they're looking for right-handed power, they're looking for somebody who hits the ball super hard. And I think Willy Adames is on that list. Teoscar Hernandez is on that list. Pete Alonso is on that list. And maybe Anthony Santander is on that list. But Alex Bregman is probably not on that list. Maybe even somebody like Paul Goldschmidt is not somebody you necessarily want to even do on a 1-year deal at this point. I think Cody Bellinger is not on that list. So there's certain fits where you're like, if you're kind of a medium hitting guy, I'm not sure I want to put you in my stadium that minuses 4.5 feet off your distances,
I think the Bregman part for the Tigers that would be interesting, though, is that because the defense is good and because Scott Harris is absolutely, as you said, a control the zone guy.
He would mention that part.
He mentioned it in his end of year debriefing. Cody Stavenhagen had a breakdown of that on The Athletic. That part makes me think Bregman could fit. There is the connection to AJ Hinch as well, so maybe that gives them an inside track. So Bregman's going to have a few suitors. I think Bregman's going to become even more wealthy a few months from now because there's a lot of things he does really well. But yeah, Willy Adames could be a fit there. Also saw a comment on the aforementioned Cody Stavenhagen piece from Chris E. I don't know if he listened to the show or she. Yandy Diaz as a Tigers trade target. And I kind of like that for the same sorts of reasons. Could play both corners as needed, gives them some versatility. Harris mentioned not wanting to be too left-handed. So Diaz as a righty that hits the ball hard fits there. And he's
a control the zone guy for sure.
100% control the zone guy. And we've wondered for a while, how long are the Rays, even though they've got Yandy on a nice team-friendly deal, how long are they going to ride that out before they decide to move on and let somebody else maybe enter the equation, such as Jonathan Aranda, who could be good enough to DH, but if he's going to play a defensive position, would probably end up settling in at first base if the playing time opened up there.
It's just like, do you have to trade Yandy Diaz? Because
nope,
right now their luxury tax number is $87 million.
Oh,
tempted to say $87, but
no, it's $87 million.
87 million, and last year was 124. So, they're almost set up to, offer some big, they're always rumored, the Rays are, to have some sort of offer out for Aaron Judge. They're always willing to like high, AAV low years offers to some of these veterans. I wonder if they'll have a surprise for us in the other direction instead of trading Andy away, because they don't really need that $10 million as much as they need production next year, especially when it comes to their bats. He's one of the few guys that hits the ball hard and makes contact. That's something that's a little bit missing from this. Plus, but if the other side of the argument is, hey, let's play Brandon Lau at first. That can happen too.
Right, or they could trade Brandon Lau. And as Brian mentioned, also among the many things damaged in hurricane season so far, the Trop losing its roof, like maybe the park will never be the same home park too.
Cost millions of dollars to fix.
Right, but that's insurance stuff. But it's just more of like, well, if the Rays have to play in a different ballpark for a little while, like that could be something that changes the calculus of players they're able to go get in free agency too. So
how much money they can bring in. The Trop, I don't think has, we know that it doesn't have great attendance, but going to like a minor league park, you're cutting your even possible attendance down.
Yeah, not ideal. Now, we started this conversation looking at how the bullpen game didn't work for the Dodgers this time around, and the decision to use Landon Knack when they did, but also to then not bother with using the rested A bullpen options they had, right? They just kind of said, all right, we're going to cruise through and let Brent Honeywell chew up a bunch of innings. And hey, we may only see Brent Honeywell one more time in this series, even if it goes 7. Like this may have been Brent Honeywell's only opportunity. Edgardo Henriquez pitched 2 innings. Banda pitched 1. So those 3 guys chewed up 6 innings. And for me, it wasn't about resting the other relievers as much as it was about not letting the Mets get a look at those guys. Because one thing we've started to talk about a little bit more on this show is diminishing value of relievers as teams get those second, third, and fourth looks in a short period of time. It's the same. We talk about the third time to the order penalty. Like there's going to be decay the more you see a reliever. Relievers have fewer pitches. So there's a couple ways to go here. But first and foremost, do you think that there is an actual team skill component to being more effective at hitting relievers? Or are there things that some teams do better than others? Be that scouting, the traject machine. Like, what could it be that leads a team to be better against relievers than they are against starters?
I would guess coaching and preparation. I would guess coaching and preparation. And I think the bad word here is guessing. That's a word that has been used to sort of denigrate certain hitters. Oh, he's a guess hitter, right? Huh?
Anticipating.
Right, exactly. Anticipating is the much nicer word. And I've even talked about that specific sort of the semantics of using those 2 words with hitters. And, I think the consensus from what I've had in these conversations, a lot of them off record because hitters don't like to talk about approach, but, I think the consensus is that with velo to where it is right now, a certain amount of anticipation is required. And what you did see from Vientos there was, I think his anticipation, what he was anticipating was, it's all going to be hard. It's either going to be an 88 mile an hour slider or it's going to be a 94 mile an hour fastball. I'm not going to see those 79s and 82s, from the changeup or the curve. And that allowed him to sort of gear up and, be like, I'm trying to get the fastball and I'm going to foul. I'm just going to relax my hands and foul off, the 88 mile. And I can do that. And so anticipation is underlying a lot of these things that are happening. We talked about, Pierce Johnson's great curveball, great by Stuff Plus, throws it 70% of the time, gets crushed in 3-0 counts when he has to come into the zone. That's where anticipation meets, Stuff Plus, and anticipation can win. And then we look at Robert Orr's great piece from Baseball Prospectus, where he looks at Seager, and Seager is making good decisions. So it's not outcomes. It's, did you swing it? That's a little reductive to say, did you swing at strikes and not at non-strikes? But it's like that. It's a little bit like looking at zone swing minus chase rate. And when you look at that piece, you have this great graph that he's made, where he shows Team Seager against starters and against relievers. And the Mets are bottom 5 in the league in Seager against starters. And they are top 5 in the league in Seager against relievers. And that's a little bit weird because you have the Dodgers, who are tops against relievers and third against starters. You have the Yankees that are top 5 against both. You have Atlanta, who was second best against starters and, sixth best against relievers. So, you have generally the teams that you think are good at approach against both starters and relievers. The Mets are just the weirdest. They're the only one in their quadrant, basically. There's no team around them in inches of graph space. And so when you see something like that, Robert Orr then goes and looks at like number of pitches, and there's some light effects there, but I think there's something about reliever tendencies, smaller arsenals, and you saw that play out, I think, in Landon Knack, where they were like, maybe they do a good job of what we talked about before, is sort of self-scouting. What if we were telling Landon Knack what to do against Mark Vientos? What would we tell him to do? We would tell him to do high fastballs, high and tight specifically, get some chases outside of the zone on high fastballs, and then sliders in the dirt. That's basically what Landon Knack tried to do. And Knack and Vientos on the other side just knew that was the approach and was just waiting for the mistake. The one that was in between.
So I'm curious where the Padres ranked in Seager against relievers, because by OPS, just by results, and again, OPS is what it is, but they were number 1 against relievers, and they were great against starters too. They were, I think,
really, because by Seager against relievers, they were bottom 8.
Interesting. So now,
like maybe 6th or 7th. It's hard to when you look at a graph like this, but Seager against starters, they were just not good. They were not a good Seager team. They found ways to be good. They were bottom 5 against both starters and relievers. So they were good because they slugged and because they made good contact. And in fact, this was an interesting thing that's come out of the Cleveland situation, which is, depending on how the series goes, there's always, the kind of the afterwards. Let's say they lose. There's going to be some soul searching in Cleveland, because what they found a certain type of hitter that's undervalued maybe by the draft or by free agency or all the different ways they've accumulated these hitters in trades. And what they found is high chase rate, low slug, high contact. That's the Cleveland hitter these days. And what I think you found in San Diego was, we're not too concerned about chase. if they can make great contact or slug. So it's a modified sort of Cleveland approach where they're like, yeah, we want to make great contact, but we also want some sluggers on this team. So I don't know. I think I've lost the question, but
no, it's this is what happens. We start thinking about things differently, and our brain kind of pulls on a bunch of threads and get a little tangled up in the threads sometimes. The Padres also had this strange thing that I've noticed with the splits against relievers. And just for reference, I mean, like generally teams saw 24, 25, 2,600 plate appearances. There is a bit of a range on like how many plate appearances you saw against relievers from team to team. I believe they had the lowest strikeout total against relievers, but that's like almost a Luis Arias like team. Like think about Luis Arias.
They kind of had the lowest
team that already
strikeout
didn't
rate
strike out a lot
against everybody.
Right, like they were a low strikeout rate team anyway. So that like I wonder if that helps you maybe outperform some decisions. Right, like you can still hit everything, you still make contact. Maybe you're not making the best decisions, but your hit tool is good enough where you're overcoming that. Like so, maybe there's some of that going on.
I mean, Seager's missing. Seager's just eye.
Yeah.
And it's missing both batted ball oomph and contact rate ability. It is interesting to see that the Padres are down there, you know, in the bad place. I mean, other teams that are down there with poor Seager against both starters and relievers, the White Sox, the Guardians, as I pointed out, the Padres, Boston, and Boston seems to be making a big bet on taking high contact rate guys and adding bat speed. That's how Christian Campbell became a top 5 prospect, overnight. That's how even somebody like, who's the shortstop there that didn't hit very well this year, but he was kind of the backup shortstop.
Cedon Rafaela?
No, the other guy.
David Hamilton.
David Hamilton did bat speed training to get where he is. There's a couple of, I think Roman Anthony did some bat speed training to get where he is. So they're making a bet on guys who have natural contact ability and coaching up the bat speed. And I guess that they're assuming that those two things, even with bad Seager, you can be successful because that's sort of where the Padres are. St. Louis was not successful. The Chicago White Sox were not successful. Cleveland did it all on contact rate for the most part. So those are the bad Seager teams. You want to know the good Seager teams against both sides. It's the Dodgers. It's the Yankees. It's the Braves. It's the Mariners. And the A's and the Rays. Arizona is also in the good place. And then Kansas City might be a little bit surprising. Good Seager against both starters and relievers. Houston's right on the line. They're the very best team for Seager against starters, and they're middle of the pack for Seager against relievers.
Yeah, it's interesting because Seager is a relatively new thing that Robert developed a few years ago, and I think I'm still learning the best ways to apply it. Use it as an analyst, use it as fantasy player. Like it's a really good way to look at who's making good choices. Like that's what it's made for.
But it mirrors our own sort of meandering obsession with chase rate on this podcast of maybe overvaluing it early on and then trying to sort of fit it in with zone swing to get a better idea. And then, ultimately we've admitted many times is just it's definitely part of why some hitters are good, but not every hitter is good because of their eye. And I think this is also something that people struggle with bat speed. It's like, how important is bat speed? Like you do look at the best power hitters, they all have great bat speed, right? Like for the most part. But there are people like Arias who are great without bat speed. There are multiple ways to be good, even on the hitter side. I think we want the hitter side. We want them to do everything. When we know this on the pitcher side, you can be you can be a Seth Lugo type, or you can be a Spencer Strider type, or there's we've assumed that we've figured out that there are different ways to be good in starting pitching. And I think it's the same in hitting. If you don't have good bat speed, you limit the amount of ways you can be good. If you don't have good Seager eye at the plate, you limit the amount of ways you can be good. If you have a prospect coming up and they are good at Seager and they hit the ball super hard and they make contact, that feels like somebody you should really invest in.
Right. Yes. So,
most likely you're going to get one or two of the three.
So imagine that you have a checklist of hitter traits, and there are, I don't know, 10 things that you care about for hitters. And you say going in, like if any hitter has half of those things, they're probably going to be at least a competent major league hitter. If they have 6 or 7 of those things, they're going to be above average. If they have 8 or more of those things, they're going to be an all-star, right? If they have 10 out of those 10 things, they are a superstar, Hall of Famer, right? So like imagine thinking about it that way instead of saying, oh, this hitter doesn't do that. It's like, okay, every hitter has something they probably don't do as well as others. Like there's a relative weakness in every single profile. Which weakness or weaknesses are okay to have with certain strengths? That's sort of like the whole analysis process. And now that I'm thinking about checklists, is it worse to pull a checklist card or a manager card?
Oh, the checklist card was awful.
Those are probably both going in the bike spokes, right?
I'm so glad that they stopped making those cards. Like, why did you put a checklist card in there? Why would anybody be happy to pull that?
It was back when sets had 792 cards in them. 792. Yeah. It's like, well, we don't need 26 managers and we don't need 12 checklists like that.
Now they divided the 792 cards over 3 different things. So all the rookies are in the Bowman set and all the
different years. Yeah, I know.
Now there's 792 different refractors for every card.
Yeah. Which refractor should I put in my bike spokes?
Well, the dumbest thing about refractors is now I don't know how to describe them when I'm looking up how much they're worth. And I'm like, it's kind of rainbowy. Oh wait, this one has like it's rainbowy, but it's X. I think this is an X refractor. And then there's just all these different refractor names. And it's like, oh wait, this is kind of like a wavy one. Is this like a wavy refractor?
I think refractor variants have gone completely too far.
I think, but back to your question. I actually think if I had to give something away, it might be I. And it's I think this is interesting. I hadn't thought about it this way. So I is one of those things that makes Joey Votto stick around for really long. And we've talked about how badly chasing outside the zone ages, right? Mm-hmm. But what if you don't care about 31 and 32 and 33? We've talked about that, but just think about it organizationally. What if as an organization, you're like, I'm probably not going to sign any of these guys long-term. It's like, what if specifically you're like the Rays or the A's?
How about this?
Then you don't care about I as much.
Did the Cubs care about Javier Baez's eye at his
The Cubs didn't, but the Tigers do.
Right. It doesn't matter how it ages if you have it for 6 years, cost controlled, and you can just bail at any time if you're not happy. That doesn't matter. That
has implications for how you run a player development situation, because you're like, okay, most of these guys are not going to sign long term. And if we do develop, even if we have values that we develop certain things, we're going to accidentally develop guys that have good eyes anyway. Right? And then we can sign those guys to long-term deals if we want. But if we value something, I hate to say it, I think Boston's got a bit of a ticket here. Like if I'm going to develop something, I want to start with good bat to ball, and I want to have good bat speed. If I have good bat to ball and good bat speed, I'll try to prepare him really well for the games. You know what I mean? Anticipate,
So organizationally speaking, Cleveland's done I think a good job for a long time of finding hit tool. It goes as far back as, Lindor was an early draft pick, so whatever. But Jose Ramirez, I think we've said this a few times, he's turned into a player that if you looked at him at the beginning of his career as a prospect and projected this, like you deserve all the trophies and all the flowers, because this outcome compared to where he started his career is absolutely absurd. But even it goes down to like the Tyler Freeman types they've had in their organization. Like they've done this well for a long time. Can they take a blueprint like what the Red Sox are doing and actually successfully implement that? Can they start to be a team that turns these hit tools into more than just bat to ball? Can they start developing that power? Can they do the bat speed train? They do it on the pitching side. They were the organization that would get guys to add velo for a long time.
I know for a fact that Stephen Kwan did bat speed training. So I know that Ramon Laureano did bat speed training, but that wasn't along with Cleveland. He just did it on his own, which I just love him for that. Like he literally bought bats off of Google and off of eBay and just figured it out. So I love that.
eBay. You bought used bats?
Yeah, he bought used weighted bats and cool, man. I mean, he did have one of his better barrel rates of his career. I can't say that I know for a fact that Andres Jimenez or Josh Naylor do it, or what I have heard about the Baltimore Orioles as they come up through the minors is that bats, weighted bat training is part of the everyday process. And that's one thing that I've heard, analysts wonder about. Is it something you can do and sort of get into a new stratosphere, or is it something you need to do all the time? How sticky are those gains? And do you need to have those weighted bats with you and do them on a daily, weekly, whatever it is basis to retain that bat speed? I know that JD Martinez brought his weighted bats to the Mets this year and was showing that to a lot of the players there. So I think that Cleveland is. My guess is Cleveland is already underway, and that's part of their idea: is get good bat to ball and try to coach up the power and not worry so much about chase rate, because right now they chase only Miami, Colorado, Houston, and the White Sox chased more than Cleveland this year.
I'm surprised that Cleveland chases that much, but it's because I'm staring at Stephen Kwan's player page as we're having this conversation. As for the stickiness and even the ceiling on bat speed training, all right, I mean, can you actually add multiple times over multiple seasons? Do you have an individual plateau that you're going to hit for the early part of your career? These are all things we don't really know yet, but Stephen Kwan, compared to when he broke into the big leagues in 2022, added just over 30 points of ISO this year, right? So you get to 14 homers in a little less than a full season. So if you got to 650, 700 plate appearances, maybe you would hit 17, 18 homers. That's pretty big jump.
Could he add a little bit more? Could he get to 150 ISO next year?
Or if this is even where his plateau is, you'll take that. That's worth it. That's a completely different player. At least an extra 8 to 10 times he's going to do more damage as a result of that. That's worthwhile, as long as it doesn't come with some kind of downside akin to sitting closer to your max as a pitcher and tearing your body up. We wondered about that with the Tristan Casas injury and some of the things that we're starting to see. You're still pushing the human body into a max sort of situation, or closer to a max. But can you live where Stephen Kwan is right now without getting hurt from swinging harder and then sustain that gain for multiple seasons? That's still really interesting. If you turn a 6 homer guy into a 14 homer guy, great. You're probably turning a 12 homer guy into a 22 homer guy. You're getting a pretty massive gain, even though at a glance you're like, oh, he's still kind of a slaps the ball all over the place guy. It's no, he does a little more now. That's an important adjustment.
Remember our first weighted bat success story was JP Crawford.
Mm-hmm.
And he did something similar where his peak ISO before had been 145 and he got it to 172, which is at first glance you say, okay, he went from slightly below average to slightly above average, but that's going from a prorated 10 11 homers to 19, and it also, in terms of WRC plus, that's going from a 95 WRC plus to a 136. Now, of course, he didn't quite show that in 2024, and he was more injured. So, he kind of fits into our overall conversation here. But still, even 9 homers and 451 plate appearances for him is a pretty good outcome compared to what he did before. So, there was some stickiness there. Even though he lost some, he regressed some. The other thing I would say is, like, if I was coaching people and if I was in charge of player development for a team, I would see some parallels here for hitting and pitching. What I would say is, what I want all of you guys to do is push your max speed in training environments so that you can throw 106 and you can swing the bat 86, but then I want you in games to not be selling out to get that 86.
Right.
So, and not be throwing 106. So have 103, sit 98, have 86 as a bat speed, sit 80. Like, sitting 80 would still make you one of the fastest bats in baseball. So I think that mitigates some of the concerns that some hitting coaches have when they talk about bat speed, and they're like, oh, but how did you get the bat speed? Are you selling out? Are you just pulling through? Are you opening up? Are you doing these things? And it's like, okay, yeah, I don't want you. I'm not telling you that I want people to do more bat speed, do it badly. I want them to do it in good mechanics. That's why I would say, like, hey, do something where you can get to 86, but you actually sit 80. You're not swinging hard when you swing hard. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, you're not, in your head, you're not swinging hard. You think this is free and easy. Oh, I'm at 82 free and easy. That's what you want the bat speed training to do for you, is not turn you into someone who's always like looking to see how hard you swung. Do
Right.
something where you can swing 86, but you actually don't always do.
We don't need a Joel Zumaya with the bat. Like,
Right.
We don't need to go. Don't go that route. I'm looking up at the ribbon board. How hard did I swing that bat?
Do you remember? Yeah. Do you remember the outfielder for the Twins that couldn't make any contact but hit the ball really hard, and he never made it to the major leagues? Really?
Are you talking about Adam Walker?
Yeah. Yeah. He had really good bat speed.
Yep. I do remember Adam Walker.
Yeah, so it's obviously not the only thing, but if I was training guys, I think I would focus on bat to ball, like it would be somewhat similar to my pitching plan. I think I'd be acquiring bat to ball, coaching up bat speed, acquiring command, and coaching up pitch speed.
I think I would want the 9 pocket around, not all the time, but I think I'd want to have it as a training tool. I like it. It's old school, it's simple, but hey, if it works for George Kirby, I'm convinced it could work for a lot of people.
Those 2 in the offseason, I love it.
Maybe he should go one step beyond that, but I think it should be part of the tool bag. Let's take a look back at the game 1 between the Yankees and Guardians. I wanted to know what you saw from Carlos Rodón that you thought might have been different. I mean, of course, by results, like, 25 swinging strikes. I mean, that's just a phenomenal outing overall. So went 6 innings, struck out 9, only gave up 1 run on 3 hits. He was rolling, just 5 hard hit balls from the Guardians in those 6 innings. And I think last time we saw him a little over a week ago against the Royals, he started off strong and things started to unravel on him a little bit the second time through the order. But was it velo? Was it stuff? Was it command? What caught your eye as you were watching Rodón on Monday?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some excellent stories about, the like sort of reining in of the passion that we saw that Carlos Rodón had. That first game was he always has like the flapping shirt with the a no undershirt, and he's always been kind of a yeller and a barker, but there was this back and forth that we saw where Carlos Rodón is screaming about things, and then after the game Michael Garcia said something like you celebrated too early or something like that, and we also saw Carlos Rodón fall apart in the 4th inning. And, so my inclination was to be like, there's a lot of reasons to be hyped up, and that we know that some part of pitch velocity, is actually intent. And that's, one of the things that we heard from Charlie Morton at some point was like, yeah, I just decided I was going to throw harder. And he wasn't going to like leave it in the tank. And so, my first inclination is like, I think this intensity helps him. And he did average 97 on the fastball in the ALDS. And among his games this year, there was only one game this year where he had a 97.1 in July. And otherwise, and then the third fastest game velo wise was 96.4 in August. So that was basically like the hardest he could throw. And he was screaming and hollering and letting it all out. And it was fun to watch, and it was some ways good for him, but it was also bad for him. And I looked at that fourth inning, and he threw 13 fastballs in that fourth inning of the divisional series. Carlos Rodón did. 8 of them were not even in shadow, or they were in waste. He wasted 8 of 13 fastballs. And I think it became pretty easy for people in that inning, especially with him sort of yelling and screaming and running around, to be like, yo, man, this guy has no idea where it's going. Like you just get one that's like above your head and you're just like, oh, Carlos, simmer down, And, what you got for Rodón in the second game was a 95.8 on the four seam, which, just fits in the sort of upper third of his games in terms of velo this year. But also just, I had to go through the fourth and fifth inning to find, I think, 3 that were in the waist, maybe 2. The other thing that he did was he mixed it up more. He was very fastball slider in that fourth inning against the Royals, maybe because of game plan, maybe because he was amped up, maybe he couldn't command the other pitches. In this game, he mixed it up more. There was more changeups, more curves, more cutters, and maybe that's something that's a little bit easier to do when you're not, screaming.
Yeah, I mean, you want intensity. You can just go a little too far. Maybe that's a big part of why that command waned. But that was a version of Carlos Rodón that gives the Yankees a lot more at the front of that rotation in tandem with Garrett Cole, who they have going in Game 2. We're not previewing Game 2 because, like I said earlier, it's going to be happening by the time people hear this podcast. So I thought we should spend a little bit of time just looking at the Dodgers-Mets Game 3 matchup on Wednesday, because there will be some time for people to digest this. And one thing that I'm really curious to see is what Luis Severino is going to try and do against the Dodgers lefties. This year, Severino struck out almost 23% of the righties he faced. Nothing in that arsenal is working really well against lefties. Home run rate goes up. K rate's under 20%. We've talked about the overall stuff numbers looking generally okay for
and
Luis
what did
Severino.
He add this year? Kind of a sinker and a sweeper. That's not going to help him against lefties.
Not going to work against lefties. So I guess, what is going to be his plan against the lefties? And Tommy Edman's a switch hitter in that lineup too. I mean, you think about Ohtani, Freeman, Muncy, Edman. Those are going to be some pretty tricky spots for Severino trying to get through that Dodgers lineup in Game 3.
I bet you he does some weird things because a lot of those guys probably have mental Rolodexes against Luis Severino because he's been around for a while. And so, I bet you he tries to do some weird things where he just throws some sinkers and sweepers to lefties just to, not be completely predictable. I mean, that's one of the reasons he did add the sinker this year, is to be less predictable. And that's something that the Mets really value. As we've said, they've got more pitchers with 3 fastballs than anybody else in the big leagues. So, that's probably what he's going to do, is just try to mix it up more than just be fastball slider against him, because they'll know all about his fastball and slider. Did want to mention real quick, Chris Kirshner has a great story about the Rodón intensity and how Andy Pettit was an important part of reining that in. Andy Pettit, one of the more legendary postseason pitchers out there. I would say that he got more chances than a lot of people, but that he was sort of legendary in terms of how calm and collected he was, and there's a great story here about how he influenced Rodón ahead of that start.
Yeah, I haven't checked that out yet. I should check that one out. If you don't have a subscription, theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels gets you in the door for $2 a month. The other side of that matchup, Walker Buehler in Game 3. So maybe one benefit of going the route the Dodgers did in Game 2 by staying away from all of their A relievers is that it's fewer looks for the Mets hitters, right? If the Mets are doing a good job scouting and anticipating what those relievers are likely to do, not burning them, even with an off day, perhaps has some value the longer that this series goes.
Yeah. And you kept him away from looks. I mean, if you're Evan Phillips, there's a lot of just two pitches. And the more the left-hander gets a look at Evan Phillips, the more that he feels comfortable in the box against him. So they kept those relievers away. I would say that the Dodgers have a little bit of an advantage in this one. I mean, I prefer Severino to Buehler sort of devoid of context, but with all this context we're giving it, it makes me a little nervous. Today, though, Bibee and Cole, that's going to be a fun one. It sounds like a pitcher's duel, of course. Who knows what that means in the end, but
yeah, it sounds like it. I think the only thing I'm wondering as the Yankees Guardian series goes on, as far as pitching usage goes, is will there be some diminishing returns with Luke Weaver? He's been fantastic, but they're using him for 4 and 5 out saves kind of on a regular basis, going a little thinner with their A bullpen list right now. I wonder if that will come back to bite them in this series or possibly in the World Series as teams keep getting extended looks at him.
I haven't seen a lot of cutters, so I think he might have one more wrinkle to show them. It's been, I think in the last outing I saw a lot of fastballs and changeups, and the cutter was something. I'm going to write about this today, but the Yankees really have it dialed in terms of like plans for pitchers when they get there, and they were like, "Hey, Luke, we want you to move your fastball grip like this much." And we want you to move your cutter grip like that much. The changeup one was the most obvious one because they went from a 2-seam to a 1-seam, but they had plans for all of his pitches, and they really affected one of the biggest pitcher turnarounds. I know that he was starting to show us something when he switched to relieving, but year over year, the Yankees did a lot with Luke Weaver, and they're reaping the benefits.
Yeah, and the thing that's also working really well for the Yankees in the early part of this series, too, is just thinking about Rodón and Cole. If they keep giving them 5+, shortening that list of relievers gives them an easy script to follow. I don't know if the Guardians are built to knock Garrett Cole out of this game early. I'm trying to come up with a script, a plan in my head that they're going to execute that's going to have us talking later in the week about, wow, Garrett Cole went 2 2/3 and got rocked by the Guardians. What did they do? And I'm struggling to even imagine that scenario in my mind, short of Cole having just no command and just getting
I was going
with
with command. I think wait him out. I think that this version of Cole right now is not at the best command wise. So I'd try to wait him into some deep counts, I think.
That might be the secret. We'll see how it plays out on Tuesday. And of course, we'll talk about it as the week unfolds. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. You can find Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. Find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. Thanks again to Brian Smith for producing this episode. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.